Good evening, folks, or good morning, depending on where you are. And it's another episode of Ghost Stories from the World with Omen. Now, we're still in Indonesia. Today's ghost story is actually of a haunted place. A haunted place known as Lawang Sewu in Semarang. 1,000 doors, 1,000 horror stories. Widely said to be Indonesia's most haunted place, the Lawang Sewu is notorious for being featured in the final episode of a local paranormal TV series, where an apparition was caught on video. A few days later, rumors spread online that one of the participants had died mysteriously. That's pretty scary. Sitting right in the heart of Semarang, the Lawang Sewu marked the Dutch's success in Indonesia. Rich in colonial-era atmosphere, the building itself is a majestic piece of architecture and a modern marvel at that time. Underground tunnels that were made to cool the building also served as passageways connecting it to the governor's residence and the harbors. During the Japanese occupation, the Lawang Sewu was used as their headquarters in Semarang. The underground tunnels of Building B served as prisons where inmates were brutally tortured and their decapitated heads were piled in a corner of the basement. Climb up a few sets of stairs and you may get goosebumps. The ghost of a girl who committed suicide to escape torture is said to be roaming the tower, often with feet floating off the ground. Now, I myself decided, of course, to go ahead and visit Lawang Sewu in Semarang. Took a ferry. I decided I wanted to see some of the aquatic scenery. I chartered a small ferry and went on my way. I got to the building, I noticed, just like they said, it was majestic. The architecture was stunning, striking for that area, for that region, the type of buildings that were there. It was just like being transported back in time. Pardon me, which I was. I was transported back to a time which seemed like it was the colonial time. What I can only think of is probably Dutch people were walking about, doing what they were doing at the time, which was being dicks. Bossing the native people around, telling them what to do, considering them less civilized and savage. Now, it's a little known story about the governor, one of the Dutch governors. Now, this story they wrote out of the books. They didn't want this one to be known. No side did, actually. Neither the Indonesians or the Dutch. It was a rather, should I say, politically incorrect thing which transpired so many years ago. Now, this Dutch governor, Leopold, can't remember his last name, don't even know if I knew it to begin with, but I know the name was Leopold. During his reign of terror, this Leopold would send out into the villages under his control for the youngest of children. The youngest. But they couldn't be too young. Now you're probably saying, oh, what a sick pervert. Sick, yes. Pervert, no. He had an affinity for gladiator fights. And he liked to watch gladiators as miniatures. Couldn't find enough midgets and shit. So he said, you know what? These Indonesian children, small, tiny. When they're young, they're even tinier. I'm going to kidnap a whole bunch of them, and I'm going to dress them up like ancient Roman gladiators. And then I'm going to make them fight to the death. Now, at first, the Dutch king kept his perverse, depraved pastime to himself. You know, he didn't really share it with anyone else. For all people knew, he was taking these children to a school from which they never returned. And no one ever asked any questions. Obviously, the Malaysian people and the Indonesian people under his control said nothing. They couldn't say anything. And yes, you did hear me say Malaysian people. He had a bit of a connection to the islands of Malaysia as well. I tell you, this very little known guy, this Dutch Leopold. Anyway, he was having so much fun with this child gladiators thing, he decided he was going to go public with it, right? You know, with a little bit of a morale drop amongst the Dutch. Entertainment wasn't all what it could have been. Not happy about it. He feared that he may not get reelected to his tenure as governor if he didn't do something to make the people happy. So he figured, you know what? I'll make up these kids to look a little bit more rough around the edges, you know? Throw some dirt on them. Maybe a little bit of fake hair to make them look like they've got stubble and shit. So people will think that they're midgets or miniature people. And no one's gonna believe these savage natives that I'm kidnapping their kids. Ha! They won't know a damn thing. So this is what Dutch Governor Leopold was thinking. Now I know what you guys are thinking. What the fuck does this have to do with the goddamn Lawang Sewu? Well, he was the Dutch governor, and that was the Dutch governor's residence. Okay, so I'm about to tell you what the fuck happened. And this is what happened. All these kids, obviously, were kept deep down within the tunnels of this building, which he would come in and he would choose, 10 or 15 or so that he would have for the show. Now I told you, he went public with the show. He went public, right? Now at one of the shows, one of the parents just so happened to recognize their child. He was like, what the fuck is this shit? After watching his son murdered, brutally slain by the other children, he swore this governor was going to pay. Was going to pay. Thousands of children over the course of a decade or so lost their lives to these gladiator games. And it wasn't until I told you when the guy saw his son murdered one of these gladiator games, the jig was up. Now I know what you're saying again. Oh God, what does this story have to do with the haunted place? It has everything to do with the haunted place. it explains some of the haunts that are in this place. First things first, the father rounded up all the townspeople who had lost children. Some of them had lost more than one child. Some of them had lost all of their children. He riled them up, told them exactly what the fuck was going on and where the fuck they got to find the guy fucking responsible for the shit. You know what they did? They marched. Pitchforks, spears, machetes, knives, rocks, clubs, sticks, poles, whatever they could find, they grabbed. Thousands. I mean, this man had been doing this for about a decade, folks. Thousands of children. There were thousands of angry, bloodthirsty parents. They descended upon the mansion. The buildings flooded them. They were unaware of the subterranean tunnels. You know, they had no idea. But they were already in a rage. Slaughtered every damn Dutch person that they could find. Oh, slaughtered them. Guards tried to hold them back with weapons, like muskets. Did nothing. Nothing. Those people didn't care. Ones who had lost children, which was pretty much all of them, were like, you know what? I don't have my child. I'd rather die than live on this earth without my future. And I will avenge them. So, they rushed this building. They finally got to the offices of the governor. They beat him senseless. And they beat some sense into him. And they beat it right back out of him again. He begged and he pleaded for his life, making up some bullshit story that he was being forced to do this for the king of the Dutch. They didn't give a fuck. Then he said, wait, your children are still alive. The man said, no, I know for a fact that my son is dead. He stabbed him in his stomach with a spear. Ooh, like a pig. Governor Leopold cried out in pain. Oh, I swear to you. Oh, some of them are alive. I'll show you where, please. He pulled the spear from his gut. Oh, blood poured. Hit the ground, splash. Show me, he said. Show me now. Dutch governor, pained as he was, wounded mortally, he was going to die. He knew this. But he figured maybe they'd be overwhelmed with emotion. And in this time, he could slip away, escape. When he led them to the door, which opened into this vast subterranean tunnel maze, and the people smelled the smell of death, the smell of human waste, vomit, urine, feces, and then they heard the whimpering sobs of their children. They flew into an absolute rage. There was nothing human about them at that moment. Those of the families that actually went inside of this area, mind you, the rest were, surrounding the building, making sure that none of the Dutch soldiers, stopped them from doing what had to be done. So, there were only about, I'd say, 30 or so of them actually inside the tunnels. And those 30 people were no longer human for a moment. They jumped on this man. They beat him with their bare hands. They had thrown down their weapons. I told you, all humanity left them. You heard them grunting and gnarling and growling. Raspy voices like beasts as they beat him. He cried. Pain, muffled screams could be heard. They beat him like orangutans and chimpanzees beat each other. Like a fucking silverback gorilla beats his chest. Oh. They beat this man until he was a bloody mess. Still alive. Still alive. Broken jaw. Teeth knocked out of his face. Nose broken. Eye sockets broken. Face broken. Skull fractured. Arms broken. Ribs cracked. Legs mashed. He lays there, wheezing, gurgling, trying to speak, but he couldn't get the words from his mouth. It was just this moment a bell went off. It was a special little defense mechanism that the old Dutch put into the tunnel system, which allowed it to be flooded if ever the need arose. And this was a time when the need arose. See, it was automatic protocol upon the missing of a governor in one of these colonial towns that if you did not check in and ring the bell at certain intervals, it would be assumed that it was time to flood the catacombs. For whatever reason. I never said why this was a protocol, but it was. Needless to say, the children that were left alive and the families that came to rescue them perished, drowned. One person was able to make it away. The man who brought them all there to begin with. Strapped with guilt. He decided never to speak of what happened. He was ashamed. It was said that he told the people that a large earthquake and tsunami shook the ground and swallowed some, and the tsunami washed away the rest. And it was believed. It was believed that they had somehow angered their gods. They went on believing this, and his shame was compounded. His guilt. It was said that he was driven crazy. One day, he went to the building and he hung himself from one of the lampposts. He is one of the ghosts that haunts the grounds to this very day. But no one was aware of his origin, so he was just lumped in with ghosts from when the Japanese committed their brutal atrocities on the land. But no, his spirit is there because he put it there. Sometimes revenge can take more than what was taken in the first place. And he learned that the hard way. Not to mention the 30 or so people that were there in the tunnels with him, and all of the children, all in anguish, torment, and misery. It was sad. I toured the tunnels. I wanted to feel the heaviness for myself, and I did feel the heaviness. It was oppressive. I can remember hearing the voices of children crying for their mothers, crying for their fathers, crying. They wanted to be let loose, free to go home to their families. And they would never see that again. Never. You could feel it. The despair. Then you can feel the hands of children tugging at you, pulling at your pant legs, your shirt, tapping you when they can, whispering in your ears for help. Help us, help us, help us, help us, help us. There's nothing that can be done. What is done cannot be undone. If you ever have a chance, folks, to check out 1,000 Doors, 1,000 Haunts, you should, if you're ever in the Indonesia area of Lawang Sewu in Semarang, if I'm saying that correctly. Tell me, if you go, what your experiences were. And if you have any stories of your own from Indonesia of the paranormal nature, well, send me an email at chaosorder, NOWC@gmail.com. And if you don't mind, I'll read it and then put my own little twist at the end of it. I want to thank you all for joining me once again for another Ghost Stories from the World with Omen. I apologize for it not being more peppy. Didn't do too much research on this one, just kind of wung it as I went. But I promise you, the next story will be a little bit more terrifying. Terrifying. You will be shaking in your blankets, quivering in your PJs, slippers sliding off your feet from the trembling that your body will do. Your nerves on edge, a simple drop and sink. What's that tapping at your window? It's just the ghost. Thank you once again, folks. If you liked the video, go ahead and give it a like. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. We're trying to make it to 500. We're trying to make it to 500, folks. I would greatly appreciate your support. Go ahead and have a good